All right, welcome everybody. It is October 17th, third Wednesday of the month, so it's time for Kubernetes office hours. This is the live stream where we take your questions from Slack on how to use and deploy Kubernetes and then try to answer as many of them as we can for you. Real quick before we start though, let's go through some intros. We'll go Joel, Priya, Ruben, Michael, Justin, Ilya, and then I'll go last.
Hi, I'm Joel Speed. I work at a company called Pusher, doing a bunch of Kubernetes stuff at the moment around controllers. So I've been in the KubeBuilders channel for the last sort of 2 months, just helping out there. Also done a lot of stuff on auth and auto-scaling in the past. So those sort of questions feel to me.
Hi, I'm Puya, working for Giant Swarm as a developer advocate, mainly focusing on security issues, but also anything around AWS, Azure, and on-prem installations.
Ruben, you can go next.
Oh, hey all. My name is Ruben Reduce. I work for Heptio. I work with Jorge. I'm a software developer specializing in QA, and I'm usually hanging out in anything related to kubeadm or cluster lifecycle.
Hello there. My name is Michael. I'm a developer advocate in the OpenShift team at Red Hat, and I do all kinds of things, coding, demos, books, whatever, and I hope I can help you.
Hey folks, I'm Ilya. I'm working for a company called Weaveworks. You may know us for ViveNet or GitOps. I would be happy to answer any questions with respect to pretty much anything, but most recently I've been focusing on Cluster API as well as developer tools and DKS.
And I guess I'm last. I'm Justin Santa Barbara. I now work at Google, but I originally got involved in AWS support and started one of the people that started the COPS project, and also very involved in Cluster API, Cluster Lifecycle, that sort of stuff. So AWS is pretty much fair game for me as well.
Awesome, awesome. It's about time we got someone from COPS on here. Always get COPS and storage. I feel like are number two. We get a lot of those. So welcome everybody. Here's how this is going to work. I'm going to lay out some ground rules. So we're hanging out in the Slack channel. That's #office-hours on the Kubernetes Slack. You can go to that if you just go to slack.kubernetes.io. Ask your question. Do question in all caps : so I could see it. And then we will go ahead and answer them in the order that we receive them. If you have a follow-up question, or sometimes we might say something like, hey, we need more information and things like that, feel free to just go ahead and respond, and then we'll get back to you. This is a judgment-free zone, so when you see people asking questions in the channel, remember we all had to start from somewhere, so try to be supportive of everybody. And we will do our best to answer your questions. Unfortunately, we don't have access to your nodes and things like that. So there's only so much troubleshooting that we can do. So in those cases, we'll just try to help you out, maybe send you to either the right SIG or get you started on how to debug a problem. Panelists, you're encouraged to just expand your answers with your experiences and pro tips. If you've helped a customer, or if, you help write the features sometimes, that sort of thing. Any advice that you have from running these clusters in production, our users always appreciate. Audience, you can help out by tossing in URLs into the Slack channel. So if you see something, we're discussing a topic that you might have read something on and you remember a blog post or something useful, or a piece of docs, feel free to we always have people that always go look, they find the relevant page of documentation, and then they just whack it into the Slack channel. That helps us collect a corpus of information around that topic and helps spread the word. Also, if we talk about things, if you have tools you can recommend, that's always useful. I think every single week I've seen a new tool that I've never seen before for a problem. And it just helps spread the wealth among the community. You can also help us out by tweeting, spreading the word, paying it forward, saying what a great time you had asking your question here. Each of these sessions is recorded and available on YouTube. We have an entire playlist going back almost a year now. I feel like we're due for an anniversary or something like that. So please feel free to check out that back catalog. If you're using these resources at work, I would love to get feedback on how we can make the format better for you. Also, if you want to sit in this wonderful panel, they're all volunteers, so the commitment's pretty much an hour a month if you can. We have enough volunteers where you don't have to sit in every single time, but it's a good way to pay back to the community by just helping someone out who might be stuck with a problem. Let's see. And if you ask a question and we read it live on the air today, you will be raffled to win a Kubernetes t-shirt, which we all continue to not wear. It's not this one. At some point, one of us will actually wear the Kubernetes t-shirt that we are giving away. What happens is I give you a code, you go to the CNCF store, and then you can say, yay, someone helped me at work, and I want a t-shirt. So, and lastly, feel free to hang out in hash office-hours. In between, we actually keep track of the questions that you ask in there throughout the month. So when we have the show once a month, we'll go back and look at questions that are unanswered. I know it can be intimidating to be in Kubernetes users with like 45,000 people in there. So hash office hours is kind of like our little spot where we can kind of carve out a little spot where you can feel free to ask questions that we can go ahead and close the loop on once a month. So with that, looks like we have a new Padlar. Do you want to introduce yourself, or are you just listening in the Zoom meeting? Let me give him a sec there. Okay, he might just be listening. He or she might just be listening in. All right, panelists, are you ready? All right, our first question comes from AdFam. Question: when running a canonical Kubernetes cluster on localhost, what would be the simplest storage class provisioner to set up that has dynamic provisioning, unlike local? When I was running a managed Kubernetes cluster on Azure, I just use Azure Disk, looking for something similar but on localhost. If you could at me when the question gets brought up so I can go back through the VOD, I appreciate it. Not able to stream this AM due to meetings. Thanks, AdFam. So I believe the canonical Kubernetes cluster is just installing the things via snaps on disk. I haven't used CDK in a while. Anyone have any ideas on this one?
I have a question. Do they mean canonical, as in the brand canonical, or?
Yeah, yes, I believe he means canonical, like Ubuntu canonical.
Yeah, and for me,
use it for the examination, right? There was a CDK, I think, back then.
For me, I think the interesting thing is he was saying localhost. So I think he's talking about or he or she, I don't know, is talking about like a single node cluster. And my guess is that for whatever reason, dynamic provisioning is not supported for like single node volumes. I think there are very interesting provisioners that you can use on bare metal. Like I've personally played around with Rook. I've heard of great things about others that might be overkill for the single node case, but like, I guess there's two questions here, right? There's the single node. I just want to have a mini cube type experience, and I honestly don't know an answer for that. But then there are also solutions that do bare metal. They work on bare metal that don't rely on like a cloud. I personally don't have experience. I don't know if other people have experience with any of those.
Yeah, I think we've tested both Rook and OpenEBS, but also those would usually rely on you having more than one node, because they would try to distribute it over a few. They could work, I think, in kind of a test setup on one node.
Mm-hmm. So if I understand correctly, the person asking the question trying to replicate what they did over in Azure, right? And so this is obviously the dynamic provisioning part. The question that I would ask there in this context is this something that you can replicate what Minikube does for you? Because there you have essentially the same. So I don't know the answer. I'm not necessarily a big canonical user, so sorry, but maybe you can replicate that somehow. That's my best guess there.
I really have no way to help other than I know the people that wrote it. So worst case, I will PM you. I will send you the information in Slack. They have their own channel on the Kubernetes Slack where they help you out. I would actually be interested in how people do things like this via all the local tools, right? Like, does Minikube do this? Does it kind of have like or is it one of those, or it's like, sorry, you need a real cluster at that point?
Not sure if the dynamic local provisioner is ready yet. Michael, do you know more?
Not about the local one, but it does have the default storage class, and it does do the. I mean, I'm doing demos with that as well, so it does do. I'm not entirely sure if that can be easily taken to the CDK stuff. I have no idea, but Minikube certainly does.
Yeah. I mean, if you use storage classes, that should be close enough, so they could just name this storage class Azure Disk, and that should be it.
Okay, moving on. The cop wants to know, when using a stateful set via Helm, is there any way to get the index of the current pod?
I don't even understand the question.
Yeah, so there's some response to the questions from before.
The index is definitely in the name, right?
Yeah.
I'm guessing so, but what is the current?
Well, you can use the downward API in a pod. Like you can use it. So there's something called the downward API, which lets you get the name of the pod you are inside that pod, exposed by an environment variable.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if there's a better way than parsing it.
So the answer is that Helm is not the place you should be looking at, right? It would be at Kubernetes API level if it exists, right? So you can try and get the name of the pod and parse to get the last portion of it, right? But then you could probably just use the host name to the same extent.
I think the question is, what are you doing next with that pod ordinal, I guess? Because so there are examples, for example, of setting up Zookeeper, for example, and there you actually just want to use the name. You want to just give each pod a different name, and it suffices to actually just use the pod name, which, as Ilya points out, might well be the host name as well.
I guess the problem is the current one, right? Apparently, he needs the current, or she needs the current, whatever they are on. So unless they are using the downward API, and I'm going to provide a link in Slack in a moment. That's pretty much the only direct way I'm aware of.
Yeah, there's a
thread to know which use case it is, like what they want to do with it. Because if they want to use it in the Helm templating again, kind of use what is created again in the templating of the next object or something, to create a list, for example, of all the pods that were created in the service, or I know, then they might need to build a small script that gets that out.
There is another way, though. It is where the service account is mounted. In this directory, there is also, I believe, if I remember correctly, the hostname or something. I would need to look it up again. I believe it's also in there. But downward API to me, definitely.
Yeah, that sounds the closest, definitely.
And I'd also say it would be better to, it would possibly be better not to use, not to rely on Helm for the templating, because then if you were to resize the stateful set in Kubernetes, if you're not, like Helm is no longer in the picture, just like, sort of the same thing we have with Kops. Like Kops is no longer in the picture once you create a cluster. Same thing with Helm. Like Helm is no longer in the cluster once you create is no longer in the picture once you create a stateful set. So if you're able to express it in terms of the downwards API alone, then it is conceivable that when you resize your stateful set from 3 to 5, that it magically does the right thing in Kubernetes land. If you have to go outside the box, then it will not work.
All right, moving on. For those of you that are just tuned in, welcome to the Kubernetes office hours. We do this the third Wednesday of every month. Feel free to hop into #office-hours, ask your question, and our panel will get to them as quickly as possible. Moving on, a Kops question. Yay. For Kops, could I skip DNS setup, e.g. Route 53 setup, and create a Kubernetes cluster for now? What would be the side effects? The scenario is the management does not decide which subdomain they would like to use. Or is it possible to set a Route 53 domain and change it later on?
Yes. So it is not possible to change the name of your cluster, the route, which includes a DNS domain name today. Mm-hmm. One of the decisions that Kops made pretty early was to use DNS for discovery, which is sort of why you need this. You can use an internal Route 53 domain name, so you can also, so you don't have to create a real domain name, but it is a real problem for people to set up domain names in general. It's hard. It often needs approval. And so we added this magic thing called kates.local. And if you do cluster.kates, K8s.local, it goes into a different DNS mode called gossip mode, or it effectively, instead of using DNS for discovery, uses a gossip protocol based on the wonderful Weave library, Weave Mesh, from the folks at Weaveworks. Thank you, Ilya. And so it seeds the list of peers by doing a describe instances colon EC2 or the similar colon GCE, and then it gossips the names around the cluster. It is a little, it's in theory less reliable just because DNS is sort of better understood than the code I wrote to do that. But it actually works fine. It also, the really nasty thing is it uses Etsy. It puts the host names into Etsy hosts, which is a little sketchy maybe, but seems to actually work in practice. And you're not losing a lot by doing that. If you want to do, it's not the recommended deployment mode for production, but it does seem to work fine. The big gotcha is you can't, you definitely need an ELB to access your API server at that point, is sort of the big gotcha. Whereas you don't, if you're using DNS mode, you can actually route direct. We can use DNS to go straight to the API server machines. So k8s.local, mycluster.k8s.local, you don't have to set up Route 53 at all.
Cool, that is good to know. All right, and he is listening, he or she is listening, so thanks for answering that, Justin. Moving on, and Watson has question, is anyone using Kubernetes Federation in production across cloud regions or even cloud vendors? Ruben, you wanted to, you hopped on this one pretty quick. You're muted. Now he doesn't want to. Or were you asking about this, or was that a storage question?
I would say I haven't heard of anyone doing it over different clouds. I heard people having it on Google, and there is people. Damn, Bob and Jeff should be here. They're most they're most versed in multi-cluster or federation, how it used to be called.
Yeah.
But
so they're
yeah,
actually here,
but
they're not on the stream, and they gave us an answer to read out. So Bob says, yes, there are people using it in production. We used it previously for academic multi-institutional project. However, the project itself has started to change directions. Things are in a state of flux with Federation as most of the development is going into Federation V2, which is very different from Federation V1 from a usability standpoint. So normally Jeff and Bob work with Federation just about every day. But this is the 1 month when neither of them could be here for office hours. So they hang out in the channel that's at Mr. Bobby Tables and at GFE with 2 E's. Just hang out in the office hours channel and they will link up. Looks like they've linked up with you and you can just ask them questions directly. They will get you involved with the proper SIG.
I can answer. There's also, I think, sure, as well as the Flux, so there's a team working on Federation V2, which I don't know if it's ready or not. My belief is it's not, or not recommended. Not recommended to be used in production. The other thing is I know there's a team at Google working on some of this stuff, and they do have something called multi-cluster ingress, which is sort of a way to set up an ingress across multiple Kubernetes clusters so that you can have one host name, your web apps served from multiple Kubernetes clusters and that set up automated. I'll drop a link in the Slack, but I think the original Federation project was super, words failing me. Ambitious. There we are. There's the magic word. Very ambitious. Right. And I think there are lots of smaller pieces, that can be like plucked off. And one of them that a lot of people seem to want was ingress. So I want to be able to, because you don't necessarily want to run all your clusters exactly the same way, because if you do them all in lockstep, then they're all going to fail at the same time, right? So ingress seems like a pretty canonical use case. And there's this tool. I think it only supports Google at the moment, I should say, but hopefully other people will add support, but I'll drop a link to it in Slack.
Right. So we essentially relaunched the whole effort, and as Justin said, try to ground it a bit more into like things that people actually want to do and can do. And it's really, to me, if someone throws in Federation, always the question, what do you want to achieve? What is your use case? Do you want to do DR? Do you want to do disaster recovery? Do you want to have build a load balancer? What exactly is it that you really want to do? And depending on what you want to do, there are multiple things. I don't know if you, Justin, do you know the current status of the cluster registry? I think that's already kind of done.
I do not know the current status, but yeah, it's a good thing to describe. Yes, we should.
The registry itself is defined, but there is still not much use of it,
right,
in terms of people entering or tools entering their setup clusters into the registry.
Right.
But like you said, it's basically you need to know about your use case, and maybe there is other options. I mean, putting a global GeoDNS in front of different clusters gives you failover region-wise. You can have pipelines pushing into different clusters too. You can build your own failover based auto-scaling through that. There's a lot of things that you can do without having things inside of Kubernetes taken care.
And one low-hanging fruit, if that's actually something real, that is essentially you have. I've seen it quite often also with customers there. You have something on premises, that might be your main production cluster, and then for seasonal reasons, Black Friday or Christmas or whatever, you want to be able to twice or 3 or 4 times the capacity. The compute capacity in the cloud, and you want to federate that essentially this kind of load balancing use case. In many cases, or most cases, for stateless stuff, not a problem. The problem is always with the data, right? Data has gravity, and that's where it can be tricky to make the data go where the compute is.
Data has gravity. I like that. I'm gonna use that. All right. The next question is what I've been looking forward to. Jim Angel asks, welcome back, Jim. How do you handle tracking user adoption over time, or chargeback, for the lack of a better term, of any given K8s cluster? I'm curious if anyone is looking at aggregated data of namespace activity, number of events, number of code pushes, or any other metric to quantify the productivity value of Kubernetes within your org. So I think this is a great question. Because this is like one of those things where it's like the technology is really cool and stuff, but I have to show my boss that this was all worth it, right? Like,
so there were from the very beginning, I believe it was mainly Tim Hawkins who coded it, Spartacus for telemetry within the cluster, and that just gives you statistics, kind of like how many pods and whatnot are running. This is something you can readily use. There are newer projects out there that do more or less the same, and I think the question really always is, what do you want to measure, right? do you want to produce a number of vanity metrics, or do you want to, for example, if it's about making the point, look, boss, we are really using our cluster, you probably want to see how many applications per namespace, per developer, per whatever. So that there are multiple tools there. I'm happy to provide a few pointers there. That to me is the easy part. Everything else, I don't know.
Yeah, there's kind of two sides to the question. One is like showing how productive you are, or what it gave you. You might want to even do like, I don't know, how many deployments to production did you have during a day before and after? That's sometimes something that on C-level or management level is really nice, where you say like, before we used to do a release every 3 months, now we're doing 50 releases a day. And that's usually something that managers really like. But then the other side of it is the billing side, or the chargeback, which is always really, really hard. I've seen some custom solutions. One of our customers have built their own based on namespaces, and basically getting metrics out of the namespace with tags, and then doing that. Or if you can separate by cluster, that's super easy. Then you can just measure how much the cluster costs you on AWS and put on a service fee for the K8s or something. There's different ways, I guess. Very custom usually, because you have always, everything is different what you want to charge back to your internal customers, usually in a company, right?
Anybody else? Joel, are you charging internal customers style?
We looked at this like 6 months ago and ended up giving up because it just was too difficult at the time. I wasn't the one working on it, but I'm trying to find, there's some project that came up on my sort of feed recently that was talking about this, and I can't find what it is. So I've just been Googling for the last 5 minutes trying to work out what it is.
Mm-hmm.
If I find it, I'll post it, but I haven't seen it. They were basically like looking at the cost of your nodes and aggregating CPU time to that and weighting it with memory as well. Like it looked like a really cool project, but I lost it.
Yeah, okay. I've just opened up my other browser, and there was KRS. I think Micah, you wrote that thing, right? That could help a bit. Right?
I just started, so that's why
I started it.
Heavily
That
work in progress.
be also a tool that helps there, right?
Yeah, but it's really, really early days. So if you want to play around with that feedback, all good. But very early days.
Too late. Ilya, before we even get to the K8s cluster, is there anything in the GitOps world that kind of helps you like track this kind of stuff? Branches merged or dashboardy things?
Yeah, you could potentially do that because then you could basically use anything that can analyze a Git commit log, right? Mm-hmm. So for which there are a few tools out there. I haven't quite looked into this particular problem, but with GitOps essentially, because now Git is your source of truth. Now you can see what's been happening through the commit log, and based on that, you can figure things out. Other than that, I was going to say, well, potentially with Prometheus, you could also tell the kind of general usage, as long as you have some kind of general way to differentiate how. Whether team has, whether you have a namespace per team or something like that.
Yeah.
And if you do have that sort of convenience, then convention, then you could do that. If that's on the team basis, if it's on the just application basis, you could just count unique deployments in some way, and that could be done with Prometheus. But you might want to use external storage, for example, something like what our project Cortex provides.
And you just triggered an association here, and that is auditing. You can also switch on auditing.
Right.
If you do have access, that's a little. I don't actually know about the managed environments. If you're looking at AKS or EKS or GKE, if you can actually get the auditing, like if you can tweak, if you can get to the control plane to enable that. But auditing is also something. So I would definitely go for multiple. Like I would try out multiple. These tools to see, maybe it's a combination of that, but like that's why I said initially these vanity metrics, that's kind of easy to do, but what's the impact, right? What does it really mean? Can you actually correlate that with actual revenue you're making? Like, it might be a tiny application that makes 80% of your revenue stream. So what does it really mean, right? The number of
I feel like a lot of the things people would want to charge with would be like for example, it would be silly if, hey, we moved to Kubernetes so we could do multiple deployments a day, but Ilya wants to charge me per deployment, so I'm not going to do that. Yeah. It feels like you'd have to have like that those awkward conversations with stakeholders.
Seen use case, especially in the enterprise, where if you don't charge, you actually get the usage that you wanted, right?
Right, exactly.
If you give them this free playground to play with, and they don't need to fill out a form and wait 2 months for a server, then you get the whole productivity gains that you wanted, right? And maybe the developers who you wanted to hire.
Yeah, we could probably have an entire episode on how to do that. We should definitely do that. Thanks for the question, Jim, and welcome back. Dan B asks, what are the best practices for handling credentials, search keys for service accounts for programmatic access to the cluster for unprivileged use cases, i.e. CI/CD that wants to install Helm charts on a cluster? I've been looking at Vault, but have not yet pieced it all together. We have any recommendations here? And OG, your question is next. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say use a service account token rather than a certificate. Kubernetes doesn't have any sort of sense of certificate revocation. So if you give a CI system a certificate and it gets leaked, there's no way to revoke that. You've basically got to rekey your Kubernetes cluster, which is not fun. At least with the service account token, if you delete the token, the service account controller will recreate a new one. You can revoke access really easily. So definitely service account token over certificate on that.
Well, you can provision certificates, right? You could use a certificate API.
Yeah, if you've automated certificates, that works, and if you don't give them system masters access in RBAC, then you can revoke them by removing the binding. That's what we do if people are using certificates, or you just use something external for auth like Vault, Keycloak. Yeah, one of those.
I don't know if that's too wide of an interpretation, but there is a very nice project by Bitnami around sealed secrets, which allow you to essentially put credential or any kind of sensitive information, even on GitHub or GitLab, whatever, and encrypts it for you, and it's kind of transparently handling that, which is kind of nice. So I'll put that on Slack as well.
Do you think it'd be nice to have a script which created a service account and rotated it every month or so, right? And automatically put it into Jenkins? That would be a cool little script if someone wanted to write something, or whatever CI/CD tool people are running.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, really. Rotation is the thing that no one's solved at the moment. I've not seen any solution to this where you've actually got rotation. Service account tokens don't get rotated. Certificates don't really get rotated that often. There's no automation around it. I think actually, having seen the Vault auth stuff around Kubernetes, that's probably the easiest way to get a more secure sort of almost rotation. But I haven't used that project personally.
I could be wrong, but doesn't Istio cover that to a certain extent? I'm not suggesting that you need to go for Istio, but don't service meshes do that to a certain extent? At least, well, that's okay. That's
they do the service to service.
Yeah, doesn't really help in that case. True. Sorry. Yeah.
And with Vault, it's always you might want to build some tooling around it, and it works, but you need to build stuff around it to make it nice and usable.
Okay, any other comments? All right, OG, welcome, asks, can we deploy multiple ingress controllers inside the same cluster?
Yes. You just need to take care that you use ingress classes once you have more than one controller. Because if you don't, then controllers will fight or concurrently set up ingress for you. So that's bad. So you need to definitely use an ingress class in all your ingress objects. You might use something more advanced. The Heptio people are working on very nice ingress advances, I would say. New CRDs, that's something to look at maybe.
Or Istio.
Yeah, not a single pitch for Contour here. What? That's, come on.
I'm wearing my upstream hat today, but yeah, Contour could definitely help you out here.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
I do wonder what the use case is. Like, I'm slightly worried this is someone that doesn't like the GKE one and wants to install like Contour, right? I'm like,
yeah.
But,
actually, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's like, yeah, I would like to see what the use case is before.
The best use cases I've seen are usually just having one for external, one for internal. Like on AWS, having an internal ELB and an external ELB and an ingress behind each. So you can say, okay, these are exposed only internally and the others are external.
Slack says that OG is typing, so I think he or she's fiercely putting in their use case as we speak. So.
Yeah, I think it's also entirely possible that people are asking just in general sense, because it's not entirely obvious whether you can do that at all or not, and what would happen if.
We run two ingress controllers on each of our clusters at the moment. One that has a certain set of features based on Nginx, and another that is a different set of features based on Envoy. We found that for our production traffic, the Nginx ingress controller doesn't load balance properly when you've got auto scaling. So we've got Envoy in front of the production stuff, but then things like the Kubernetes dashboard, Prometheus, Grafana, we will host that behind Nginx because it's got the sort of single sign-on stuff that we needed for that. So there are a few use cases. It's normally about the feature sets of the ingress controller, I think. But yeah, ingress classes solves that.
Yeah, and
clarification, right? Evaluation side by side. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So I think the use case here is, can we set them both up and then see which one works for us?
Looks like a feature comparison.
Yeah.
So should be
Evaluation.
fine.
Yeah.
You'd have to deploy
Just
the same
remember
ingress.
to use. Yeah, ingress class is the one thing that you want to take care of. That's the way you would control which ingress controller is being used.
Yeah. Also, if you set up two of the same ingress controls, like two Nginx, then you need to set the ingress class as a flag on startup. Otherwise, you'll just have a single one kind of running next to each other.
Yes, you will.
Ruben is nodding as if from experience on that one.
You'll also want to make sure the leader election is separate on that as well, because I think the Nginx one, leader elects for who's going to make the configuration. So that's something to be wary of if you're running the same one.
It sounds like this would be something that a lot of people would do. So if I don't know if both of your coworkers are interested in the same question, I'd love to see a blog post on someone setting up multiple ingress controllers and kind of doing a little chart, you know. I'd always think that'd be useful. But yeah, hopefully that will get you started. All right, any other comments on ingress controllers before we move on? All right, and Watson asks, real quick, if you're just joining us on the stream, this is the Kubernetes office hours, third Wednesday of every month. Hop into #office-hours on slack.kubernetes.io, ask your question, and we will get to it as soon as we can. If we read your question live on the air, you'll be entered to win an awesome Kubernetes t-shirt. But that raffle is at the end of the show, so we make you sit through the whole show. All right, moving on. N. Watson says, question, in large organizations, what approaches are folks taking in deploying Kubernetes in terms of large shared clusters or smaller clusters shared by fewer teams? So this is a question I actually see commonly asked. You know, do I want like one big cluster with a lot of namespaces? Do I want like a lot of little clusters, but then I have a management overhead? What?
I think it's a trade-off analysis that you have to do, and it really depends on the org. And I think it goes around the process, given the limitations, I would say, of the story around federation, right? Like you say, well, that we cannot handle or manage it that way. So that way, we need to decide whether we want a huge Voltron cluster with 500 different nodes, or we want 5 clusters with 100 nodes each, right? Like again, it's the trade-off between operational cost versus the ability to like blast radius. If that cluster goes down, you want the other 4 to go down as well, right? Like so. I don't think there's a clear answer right now. Like I don't think other than what matters to you the most. If disaster recovery or high availability is an issue, I would say it's better to have more clusters as opposed to less, in the sense of like something happens, that cluster gets sick, you have another one to jump onto. So it really depends. But if that's not a concern for you, then maybe the lower management cost might be worth for you. So.
Yeah. Well, the lower management cost itself is kind of you will have less clusters to manage, but then you need to set up your clusters a lot more carefully. You need to put in RBAC, PSP, give very specific roles to then mitigate this blast radius, which is possible. And we've seen both. I've customers with like 10 clusters and one with 2 that replace those 10 or so, and customers moving between such models even. It depends also if you need a lot of communication between your services. If you have all services talking to each other, you might not want to run them in different clusters. Otherwise, you have tons of peering between clusters and
exactly.
Costly too.
And with the one large cluster approach, it's also still a question of how much multi-tenancy isolation do you expect? Because to set it up properly, there's tremendous amount of effort that will have to go into that, and to some definition for like the strongest isolation is sort of impossible at the moment, right? Or very, very hard, or infinitely hard. So there have been multiple talks that you would be able to find on YouTube on the topic of isolation and multi-tenancy, and the general bottom line is essentially it's fairly hard I mean, if you want it very strong, then it's going to be super hard, right? And if that's what you're in for, you could do that. Or if you find with some basic isolation in terms of RBAC or like namespace level RBAC rules or whatever, team per namespace per team or whatever, if that suits you, that's fine. But if you need something quite complex, then it may end up pretty complicated, to be honest, and maybe not hosted. Easier to run with bunch of small clusters.
I think there's a long-term trend here, which is like in the beginning, in the like 1.0 of Kubernetes, there were not a lot of features that would have made running multiple tenants safe. Like RBAC wasn't there. Quotas were early. I think they were in 1.0, but I don't remember. Like quotas were certainly like one of the first things in there. There were a lot of unprivileged ports or sort of insecure ports listening that anyone could then hit. There was no network policy for network isolation. There are other things happening like different container runtimes that might be more secure. There's a general trend towards making it safer to run more workloads in one cluster. And I think one of the things that is driving that from within Google is Google's experience with Borg is by putting lots of workloads into one cluster, you are able to achieve higher utilization of it, particularly if you're able to mix batch and real-time or web type workloads. So obviously Google has a good mix of batch and real-time workloads and is able to achieve, I think the numbers are public. There's a good paper about there's some good papers about Borg. There are like 2 or 3 papers that I encourage people to dig up, and I'll try to put some links in there, which I think have some of the numbers on utilization. But they are like much higher than you normally expect. And I think that's sort of that's the big goal that's the big carrot in terms of running in one big cluster rather than in 10 small clusters.
Definitely. And I guess mainly through a lot of work from Red Hat, from Jordan, for example, who have put in a lot of these mechanisms like RBAC and pod security policies to make this possible. It's getting easier. We might need more tooling around it to make it easier for users to set up. Because if it's too hard, they're not going to use it.
All these APIs exist now, and specifically, we're talking about RBAC APIs and the pod security policy and network policies. But some of those are tremendously difficult to actually express. If you actually want to go to some extreme where you're kind of trying to totally blacklist everything and whitelist all the network connections that are allowed, right? And then if you want to do that, it takes quite a bit of effort, and there may be things that you can't actually you're unaware of, and those are hard to track down. So it's not that easy. So that's something to keep in mind, right? A lot of APIs exist, but using them isn't trivial.
There's another thing, I'm not sure if we've mentioned it already, and that is pod and node affinity, which if you have a bigger cluster, which allows you to, in addition to stuff that Justin mentioned, like network policies and other things, that allows you in terms of placement, where you could say you have a policy that for a certain rack or whatever, only pods from cluster from user X go or whatever. So that is certainly something. And to put that in perspective, what Justin said in terms of utilization, I'm all for it. But not many people are Google, right? So I guess 60, 70, 80%. That's kind of like woo. That would be in a year or 2 years' time. I think people would already be happy with 30, 40% utilization rather than the 5% they currently have. So this is certainly true. But this is this is almost for me like, let's write a custom scheduler, right? Like, all right, let's first use the tools, the simple tools, which are already very powerful.
Yeah, I'm just trying to explain this is sort of my view of why we're going in a certain direction. And I don't think we today have the right tools for batch workloads in Kubernetes, for example. I mean, there's jobs and things like that. So I think we can do more there. We need to make it easier to get more batch workloads onto Kubernetes so that we don't have anything to fill it in with yet. As far as I know, there aren't a ton of people running batch on Kubernetes.
I think the batch cleaner just went into alpha in the last version. So cleaning up batch jobs was also kind of a tedious work before that.
I think what Justin really was hinting at was also kind of migrating these HPC workloads that,
have traditionally occupied mainframes and other nice environments, onboarding them on Kubernetes in a nice way. And yeah, there I agree. We in terms of that kind of workload, we still very early days.
Okay. We are down to our last 15 minutes, so I want to get these two questions, and especially this one, as we're kind of trying to scope it down here. Paddler asks, how would I go about emulating kubectl apply using client Go? And then it looks like we're trying to find out what exactly he's trying to do here. Lots of opinions already. Justin, go.
So there's something called server-side apply, which is a long-lived feature branch, should hopefully merge in either 1.13 or 1.14. So it will then be an API and you can do it from client Go. There is a ton of logic, though, in it, and it's currently in kubectl. So your best bet is either to vendor KK or shell out to kubectl apply, sadly, until server-side apply comes. My view is, when I've done this, I've shelled out to kubectl apply on the grounds that server-side apply is going to fix all my problems, and so I'm doing something evil, but it's only short-term.
I want to echo what Justin just said. It was I tried, for my own edification, try to re-implement some of these things, especially the merges, and especially like trying to reconcile stuff that is already present in the server that I need to patch and then add other stuff to it. And it becomes, the logic becomes pretty mind-numbing. So like, yeah, just shell out to kubectl.
All right. Any other comments on that one? It looks like, what's this kubectl here? What?
That's exactly what Justin just said. Just
okay.
It's a wrapper around it, so you can use it in Go instead of in Bash.
I like it. It hides the evil under layer of indirection, right?
Exactly.
The big lesson is follow your personal GitHub namespace. I'm Hasenblas. Got it. You get a lot of little tools in there. I'm browsing in between the questions. All right, so hopefully, Paddler, that would help you out. And then he's talking about a three-way merge. Oh, that's scary. Okay. OG asks, can someone explain the integration between a metal LB and an ingress controller? What is the role of a metal LB in this use case? Metal LB is the load balancer from Google.
I thought Metal LB was layer 4, if I'm correct.
Yeah,
I'm typing.
I think it's something we've done this before, building it in HA proxy, kind of as an ingress of ingress, to load balance to different ingresses or to different clusters in a bare metal environment. I think Heptio Gimbal is trying or doing something similar too, if I've understood the project right.
I am pasting in that URL.
So it's basically if you have no API access to your F5 or what big IP what you have on premise, you might want to put a load balancer or a software load balancer that is similarly powerful there to have TCP load balancing in front of a few clusters on-prem, for example.
Yeah, I think the way, if I understand correctly, like the way I'd explain it is like on AWS, we originally did ingress by means of the Nginx ingress controller, which lived in your cluster. And then in front of that, you would put a traditional AWS ELB, which is like a TCP, a layer 4 load balancer, which is actually gets the traffic into your cluster. There's also now an ingress controller which does like AWS ALB, for example, which is sort of, that's HTTP layer 7, and it sort of pushes the HTTP, the Nginx component out into AWS. So AWS runs all of that for you. So it combines the routing and combines the TCP routing and the HTTP routing, as it were. My understanding is MetaLB is the sort of equivalent for the on-prem world of the AWS ELB, the layer 4, the TCP load balancer. And with that, you would still run an HTTP, a layer 7 load balancer like Nginx. And you'd run the Nginx ingress in your cluster, or other ones, Envoy or Contour or other ones I'm pretty forgetting, but please speak up. But then MetaLB, I think, does something similar to AWS ELB, in other words, routing TCP traffic to your nodes in a BGP environment. So in a sort of bare metal, raw hardware, Cisco's type environment.
Yeah,
Cisco certified network
you
engineer.
don't wanna have L7 in front of L7, especially if you have maybe clusters that have different kinds of needs, and some might want to use SNI, some might want to terminate SSL directly. So then you want to just tunnel through the TCP stream and then decide inside the cluster what you do with it.
Okay, anything else? Sorry, thought I was muted. Okay, next question comes from Alan. Welcome to Office Hours. We're starting to run out of time here. He did have a dangling question, and then there's a link. What's the correct way to get annotations needed by metric scrape, in my case, added to pods produced via deployment/stateful sets from a Helm chart? Should the chart expose values for arbitrary annotations? Many don't. Should PRs be made? Should pod preset or some other emission controller doctor the pod just before creation without touching the Helm chart? Something else?
I usually don't use upstream charts. I would keep own forks of them and have my own production level charts for those. You could use something like a mutating webhook to add things on top, or you would just basically change the templating. Doing upstream PRs to add that, not sure how easy it is or how fast it is to get a PR merged into a chart, especially in a stable chart repo.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the names of these annotations kind of depend on your Prometheus config. So if you're seeing inconsistency between charts, that implies that they assume certain Prometheus config. So the way to fix that would be fixing the chart, I assume, or supporting different options in your Prometheus config. Unfortunately, Prometheus config is fairly complex in itself, but you could do certain things there, and you could do special casing there as well. So you could say in the Prometheus config, you could match on a particular deployment name or pod name, and then use like labels on the pod to match thing, and then rewrite annotations as you will. So those things are kind of possible, but it's not very straightforward. It's a language in itself.
I must admit, I'm not 100% sure if I understand what exactly the problem or the use case is, but why not just doing it like not within Kubernetes, but on the Prometheus side with label rewriting? Like,
why not do that? Or
no, I'm just I'm wondering what exactly is it just a question around the good practice, or like?
I think the problem is that the upstream charts have different ways of templating that, and for if the upstream charts supports Prometheus but not any kind of annotation, and you have Datadog, for example, you might not be able to add the Datadog specific annotation into your deployments for Datadog to scrape those pods, for example.
Yeah, but isn't it also the case that some people tend to opt in to Prometheus scraping versus some other cases people opt out of it?
Yeah, exactly.
And some charts assume either way, and so have to kind of figure out which one do you want to use.
Yep, Alan actually says, in my specific case, I'm working with Datadog that wants annotations applied to pods controlling check behaviors. I think that's a type.
Yeah.
So one thing you could do, and this is more for exposition than as a serious suggestion, although it's actually fine, is after you run Helm, you could kubectl patch or kubectl apply your labels, right? So you could, or annotations, you could actually fix it up. I think the reason I say it's more for exposition is I think this is there's a tool called Customize, which tries to take that sort of layering approach. And it's sort of a different way of thinking about this than Helm, because the problem with Helm is you have to sort of build it into the template, and everyone builds it into the template, and suddenly the template is just all these pointers out to other things, and there's nothing left in the template. And so like Kustomize is a sort of alternative way of doing that, which is sort of more designed for layering things on top. And the idea that there's an upstream which has a base, and then you layer your particular changes on top, or like pull them from someone else who has layered their Datadog things on top. So I'll put a link to Kustomize in there. It is another way of doing things. It is sadly like a different ecosystem and a more nascent ecosystem than Helm. But I would love to see some form of integration between Kustomize and Helm, such that we could, just like make that apply annotations on top of a Helm chart scenario, which Kustomize is great at. Make Kustomize work with Helm in that regard. I think that'd be amazing.
Yeah, definitely a topic to discuss.
All right, and with that, that was our last question. So we're gonna close it up real quick and then do the t-shirt raffle. I'd like to thank everybody, thank our panel for joining us. The following companies have been supporting the community office hours with these developer volunteers, including Giant Swarm, Heptio, StockX, Packet.net, Pusher.com, Red Hat, Weaveworks, VMware, Zing, Huawei, and the University of Michigan. Also, special thanks to Google for sponsoring our t-shirt giveaway today. And with that, the winner of the t-shirt is, can I get a drum roll from someone? And Watson, you won Kubernetes. So I will go ahead and ping you. Thanks everybody who listened to the live stream. I think this is pretty much the busiest live stream we've had so far. I'm still waiting for the metrics to crunch, but thanks those of you that tuned in. We are having another session in about 6 hours for the West Coast US folks with an entirely new panel and an entirely new set of questions. So we hope you join us then. And with that, thank you panel, and we'll see everyone next month.
Later, everyone. Yep.
Bye.
See you guys.
See you soon. Bye.